Welcome back to Her Journey, where we share the most powerful, shocking, and transformative stories from women who refuse to stay silent. I'm your host, and today's story will absolutely blow your mind. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens when a mother's love turns into calculated revenge. Trust me, this one is going to leave you speechless. They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes blood can turn to poison in your veins. My name is Anaya Layla Rodriguez, and at 62, I thought I understood betrayal. I was wrong. What my son and daughter-in-law did to me last Tuesday night didn't just break my heart. It awakened something dark and calculating inside me that I never knew existed. Picture this. I'm standing in the laundry room, folding my grandson's tiny Batman socks, humming softly to myself, when my daughter-in-law Skylar walks in holding her phone like it's a weapon pointed directly at my chest. "Anaya," she says, not quite meeting my eyes. "We need to talk." The way she said my name, cold, distant, like I was a stranger she'd barely tolerated, made my blood run cold. For 3 years, I'd been Mom or Grandma Anaya. Now I was just
Anaya.
"What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, setting down the sock I was folding. "Blake's parents are moving in," she announced, her voice flat and final. "We need the space." I blinked, still holding one of little Zayden's socks. "They're visiting?"
No. Moving in.
"Permanently." She crossed her arms, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't even a notification. This was an eviction notice. "But where will I started. "You'll need to be out by the end of the month," she cut me off. That's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. It sounded so absurd, like a bad joke with a punchline I hadn't heard yet. I waited for her to crack a smile, to say gotcha, to reveal this was some twisted prank. She didn't. "You're serious," I whispered. "Dead serious. Blake's mom has diabetes and needs constant care. His dad has severe back problems. They need family support." The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, I'd been the one providing family support. I'd moved in after my husband Miguel died, ostensibly to help Skylar with the twins while Blake worked his unpredictable construction schedule. I'd been their live-in nanny, maid, cook, and financial safety net all rolled into one convenient package, but apparently, I was no longer the right kind of family. Did I place the sock carefully in the basket, stood up slowly, and looked at this woman I'd welcomed into my family, this woman I'd supported through postpartum depression, this woman whose children I'd raised like my own. "I see," I said quietly, and in that moment, standing in that laundry room surrounded by clothes I'd washed, dried, and folded 1,000 times before, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't just losing my home. I was discovering exactly what I was made of. What happened next would destroy their lives so completely, so systematically, that years later people would still whisper about the woman who turned family betrayal into an art form of revenge. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it really started, not with that conversation in the laundry room, but 3 years earlier, when I made the biggest mistake of my life. Trusting family. 3 years ago, when Miguel's funeral flowers were still fresh in our bedroom, Skylar called me sobbing. "Mom Anaya," she'd cried into the phone. "I don't know what to do. The twins are teething, Blake's working 18-hour days trying to make foreman, and I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. I'm losing my mind." My heart broke for her. Zayden and Zara were barely 8 months old, and Skylar was drowning in the chaos of new motherhood while Blake chased promotion opportunities that demanded every waking hour. "What do you need, sweetheart?" I'd asked. Could you maybe stay with us for a while? Just until things settle down? I know it's a lot to ask, especially with you grieving, but I'm scared I'm going to hurt the babies. Not on purpose, but I'm so tired I can barely think straight. The request should have felt like an imposition. Instead, it felt like salvation. The house Miguel and I had shared for 37 years had become a mausoleum of memories. Every corner whispered his name. Every shadow held his ghost. The idea of being needed, of having purpose again, was exactly what my shattered heart craved. Of course, I'd said without hesitation, "I'll be there tomorrow." I'd intended to stay 2 weeks, maybe a month. Just long enough to help Skylar find her footing and establish some routines with the twins. That was 3 years ago. What started as temporary assistance had morphed into permanent residency, but not in the way I'd planned. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped being a helpful grandmother and become essential infrastructure. I woke at 5 a.m. to prepare Blake's lunch and start the coffee. I managed the twins' complex schedules of feedings, naps, and playtime. I maintained the household, cleaning, cooking, organizing, shopping. More significantly, I'd become their financial lifeline. Blake's construction salary barely covered the mortgage and basic utilities. Skylar had taken extended maternity leave that stretched far beyond their savings. My pension and Miguel's life insurance had quietly filled the gaps. Groceries, daycare deposits, medical copays, car repairs, emergency expenses that would have crushed their fragile budget. I'd kept meticulous records, not because I intended to seek repayment, but because Miguel had trained me to track household expenses. The numbers told a stark story. Over 3 years, I'd contributed $78,000 to keep their family afloat, but money was just the beginning. I'd given them something far more valuable. My life. I'd postponed my own plans, abandoned my own interests, molded myself into whatever shape their family needed. When Blake complained about my cooking, I learned new recipes. When Skylar criticized my childcare methods, I adjusted my approach. When they locked the thermostat at an Arctic 66 degrees, I bought sweaters and said nothing. I became smaller and smaller, condensing myself into whatever space they allowed me to occupy. The gratitude had evaporated gradually, so slowly I'd barely noticed until it was completely gone. The thank yous became rare, then disappeared entirely. My contributions became expectations. My presence became tolerated rather than appreciated. But the breaking point came 6 months ago, when I'd overheard a conversation that shattered every illusion I'd maintained about my place in their family. Blake had been on the phone with his brother Camden, complaining about money troubles while I prepared dinner in the adjacent kitchen. "I swear, man, between the mortgage and daycare and everything else, we're barely keeping our heads above water," Blake had said. "What about your mother-in-law?" Camden had asked. "Doesn't she help out?" I'd held my breath, waiting for Blake to acknowledge my contributions. "She helps with the kids sometimes," Blake had replied dismissively. "But she's basically just living here rent-free. It's not like she's really contributing anything meaningful." Rent-free. Not contributing anything meaningful. I'd stood frozen in that kitchen, vegetable peeler in my hand, processing the magnitude of his dismissal. 3 years of my life, $78,000 of my money, countless hours of my labor, all reduced to living here rent-free. That night, I'd started planning my exit strategy. Not revenge, not yet, just a quiet extraction from a situation that had become untenable. I'd researched apartments, calculated budgets, even visited a few properties. But every time I'd gotten close to actually leaving, something would happen. Zara would climb into my lap and call me her best grandma. Zayden would ask me to read just one more story. Skylar would mention how grateful she was for my help, how lost they'd be without me that I'd stayed because I'd convinced myself I was needed, that my sacrifice was meaningful, that family loyalty was more important than personal dignity. Tuesday night's conversation in the laundry room had finally shown me the truth. I wasn't family. I was free labor with an expiration date. But here's what Skylar and Blake didn't understand about me, what 3 years of taking me for granted had hidden from their view. I wasn't just a convenient grandmother they could discard when someone better came along. I was Miguel Rodriguez's widow. Miguel, who'd built a construction empire from nothing. Miguel, who'd taught me that respect isn't given, it's demanded. Miguel, who'd shown me that sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it yourself. They thought they were evicting a helpless old woman. They were about to discover they'd just declared war on someone who'd learned strategy from a master. The morning after Skylar's announcement, I woke at my usual 5 a.m. and went through my normal routine: coffee, breakfast prep, reviewing the day's schedule. But everything felt different now, like I was seeing the house through new eyes. I wasn't looking at a home anymore. I was conducting an inventory. I started in the kitchen, opening cabinets and mentally cataloging their contents. The KitchenAid mixer I'd bought when Skylar mentioned wanting to bake with the twins, $400. The Instant Pot that had revolutionized their meal prep, $150. The complete set of Le Creuset cookware I'd gifted them last Christmas, $800. The refrigerator hummed with groceries I'd purchased. The pantry overflowed with staples I'd stocked. Even the coffee Blake was about to pour had been bought with my pension money. I moved through the house methodically, taking notes on my phone. The sectional sofa in the living room, mine, purchased after Blake complained their old couch hurt his back. The 65-inch smart TV mounted on the wall, mine, bought so we could all watch movies together. The expensive air purifier running quietly in the corner, mine, installed when Zara's asthma flared up last spring. I and the twins' room. I surveyed 3 years of gifts and necessities. The convertible cribs I'd bought when they outgrew their bassinets. The educational toys carefully selected to support their development. The bookshelf lined with stories I'd read to them countless times. The master bedroom held more evidence of my invisible contributions. The mattress topper that helped Blake's back problems. The blackout curtains that improved Skylar's sleep. The humidifier that eased their winter breathing issues, but it was the garage that told the real story of my investment in their lives. The washer and dryer set I'd purchased when their old machines died during a stomach flu outbreak. The storage system I'd installed to organize Blake's tools. The deep freezer where I'd stored bulk grocery purchases and batch-cooked meals. By the time Blake and Skylar woke up, I had a comprehensive list spanning 17 pages. Every item I'd purchased, every improvement I'd made, every dollar I'd spent trying to build a life with people who just announced I was no longer welcome, $47,000 in household goods and improvements, $78,000 in direct financial support, $31,000 in childcare and household labor calculated at market rates, $156,000 total investment in a family that had just evicted me with a month's notice, but the money was only part of the calculation. There were intangibles that couldn't be quantified. The birthday parties I'd planned, the school events I'd attended, the sick days I'd managed, the bedtime stories I'd told, the tears I'd dried, the love I'd given freely and completely. Blake stumbled into the kitchen at 6:30, looking for coffee that I'd already prepared. He grunted a greeting without making eye contact, standard behavior that I'd normalized but would never tolerate again. "Morning," I said pleasantly, watching him pour coffee into a mug I'd bought. "Thanks for making coffee," he mumbled, already checking his phone. "You're welcome," I replied, making a mental note. Even basic courtesy was apparently beyond his capabilities now. Skylar appeared 20 minutes later, hair messy, wearing pajamas that I'd bought her last Mother's Day. She moved through the kitchen like I was invisible, grabbing a travel mug and preparing to leave for her part-time marketing job. "I left a list of groceries we need on the counter," she said without looking at me. "If you have time today." If I had time. As if my entire day wasn't already dedicated to maintaining their household. "Of course," I said sweetly. "Anything special you need for Blake's parents' visit?" She paused, clearly having forgotten about the conversation the night before.
Oh, right.
"Yeah, we'll need to stock up on diabetic-friendly options for his mom." and probably get some better pillows for his dad's back. I nodded thoughtfully. When are they arriving? Next weekend. We want to get settled before. She trailed off, apparently realizing she was discussing my replacement while asking me to facilitate it. Before I leave, I finished for her. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. Anaya, I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's just logistics. Logistics. That's what 3 years of devotion had been reduced to, a logistics problem that required a new solution. I understand completely, I assured her. And I did. I understood that they'd taken my loyalty for granted. I understood that they'd mistaken my generosity for weakness. I understood that they'd assumed I would quietly accept whatever treatment they decided I deserved. Most importantly, I understood that they had absolutely no idea what they'd just set in motion. After they left for work and the twins went to daycare, I sat in the quiet house and opened my laptop. I had 30 days to plan my exit, but I wasn't just leaving. I was conducting a strategic withdrawal that would leave them with exactly what they'd given me. Nothing that I started with research. Tenant rights, property law, estate planning, asset recovery. Miguel had always said knowledge was the foundation of power, and I intended to be very powerful over the next month. Then I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. My friend Carmen, who happened to be one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in the city. Carmen, I said when she answered. It's Anaya Rodriguez. I need your help with something, and I promise you're going to find this case very interesting. Carmen Delgado had been Miguel's business attorney for 15 years before becoming my friend. She was sharp, ruthless, and had a particular talent for finding legal loopholes that others missed. More importantly, she despised people who took advantage of family relationships. We met at her downtown office the next morning, a space that screamed competence and intimidation in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling law books, diplomas from prestigious universities, and awards for legal excellence covered every wall. This wasn't someone you wanted as an enemy. Let me understand this correctly, Carmen said, reviewing the documentation I'd brought. You've been living with your son and daughter-in-law for 3 years, during which time you've contributed over $150,000 in direct support while providing full-time child care and household management. That's correct. And they've now informed you that you need to leave because his parents are moving in. With 1 month's notice. I confirmed. Carmen's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her mahogany desk. Do you have any written agreements about your living situation? Any documentation of your financial contributions being considered rent or investment? No formal agreements, but I have 3 years of bank records, receipts, and a detailed ledger of every contribution I've made. She smiled, and I recognized the expression from her courtroom victories. Excellent. Based on what you've shown me, you have several legal options. First, as a long-term resident who's contributed to household expenses, you may qualify for tenant protections under state law. They can't simply evict you without proper notice and due process. I leaned forward. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Formal eviction proceedings, assuming they want to do this legally, could take 3 to 6 months minimum. But here's where it gets interesting. Your financial contributions create what we call equitable interest in the property. You could potentially claim partial ownership rights. My heart raced. Ownership rights? Think about it this way. You've essentially been paying rent, utilities, and improvements for 3 years. In some jurisdictions, that level of investment combined with your understanding of permanent residency could constitute an informal joint tenancy. Carmen pulled out a legal pad and started sketching. But there's another angle that might be even more powerful. Your childcare and household labor has significant economic value. If we calculate 3 years of live-in nanny services at market rate, plus housekeeping, plus elderly care assistance for you helping them, she ran quick calculations. We're looking at potentially $200,000 in services provided. If they want you to leave, They could arguably owe you compensation for premature termination of an implied long-term service agreement. I felt something dark and satisfying unfurl in my chest. So, I don't have to just walk away quietly. Honey, you don't have to do anything quietly. But before we discuss legal action, tell me what outcome you're really looking for. Are you trying to stay in the house? Seeking financial compensation? Something else? I thought carefully about my answer. The truth was, I no longer wanted to stay in that house. Skylar's announcement had shown me that I'd been living as a guest in a place where I was merely tolerated. No legal victory could restore the family dynamics I'd thought existed, but I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they were throwing away. I wanted them to face consequences for their callousness. I wanted them to realize that treating family like disposable help came with a price. I want them to experience exactly what life looks like without me, I said finally. I want them to understand the value of what they're losing, and I want to make sure they never forget the cost of their choices. Carmen's smile widened. Now that's a goal I can work with. Let me propose a 3-phase strategy. She sketched out a timeline on her legal pad. Phase 1. We establish your legal rights and buy time. I'll send them a formal letter outlining your tenant status and financial interest in the property. This will force them to go through proper legal channels if they want you to leave, which adds months to their timeline. Phase 2. We document everything. Every contribution you've made, every service you've provided, every improvement to their property. We build an airtight case for compensation while making it clear that forcing you out will be expensive and complicated. And Phase 3. Carmen's expression turned predatory. Phase 3 is where we get creative. See, the beauty of your situation is that you hold all the practical cards. You know how their household runs because you've been running it. You understand their financial vulnerabilities because you've been covering them. You have access to information about their lives that they've probably forgotten they shared. She leaned back in her leather chair. They want to evict the person who makes their life possible. We're going to help them understand exactly what that means. I left Carmen's office with a retainer agreement and a timeline that would give me leverage for months. But more importantly, I left with something I hadn't felt in 3 years: power. That afternoon, I returned to the house and went through my daily routine with new purpose. I prepared dinner, helped with homework, managed bedtime routines. But now I was studying every task, memorizing every detail, cataloging every way their lives would change once I was gone. Skylar came home exhausted from a difficult day at work, collapsed onto the sofa I'd bought, and immediately started complaining about office politics while I prepared dinner in the kitchen. I swear, if Janet undermines one more of my presentations, I'm going to lose my mind, she ranted. The woman has been there for 2 years and acts like she runs the place. The irony was so thick I nearly choked on it. Skylar was complaining about a colleague who'd been at her job for 2 years acting entitled, while simultaneously evicting the woman who'd been essential to her household for 3 years. That sounds frustrating, I said neutrally, plating the meal I'd prepared with groceries I'd purchased. It is. Some people just don't understand boundaries and respect. I set her plate in front of her, kissed the top of her head like I always did, and smiled. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Some people really don't understand respect at all. She had no idea I was agreeing with her assessment of herself. Over the next week, I became a forensic accountant of my own life. Every morning after Blake and Skylar left for work and the twins went to daycare, I transformed into an investigator documenting the crime scene of my own generosity. I photographed every room from multiple angles, cataloging items I'd purchased, improvements I'd made, and systems I'd organized. The spice rack I'd installed and stocked. The closet organization system I'd designed for the twins' room. The garden I'd planted and maintained in their backyard. I gathered receipts dating back 3 years, organizing them by category: household goods, groceries, utilities, medical expenses, children's items, home improvements. The paper trail told a story of consistent, substantial financial support that had become invisible to its recipients, but the financial records were only part of the evidence I was collecting. I started keeping a detailed daily log of my activities, tracking every service I provided and calculating its market value. Monday, 6 hours childcare, $120. 3 hours house cleaning, $75. 2 hours meal preparation, $40. 1 hour laundry service, $15. Total value, $2.50 to Tuesday, 4 hours childcare, $80. 2 hours grocery shopping and meal planning, $50. 1 hour pet care for their dog Luna, $20. 3 hours household organization, $60. Total value, $2.10. The numbers were staggering. I was providing over $1,500 worth of services every week, more than $6,000 per month, over $72,000 annually. And that didn't include the irregular services like staying home with sick children, managing repair appointments, or handling family emergencies. I also started recording conversations, using my phone's voice memo app during seemingly casual interactions. Nothing illegal, just documenting the casual dismissiveness that had become their default mode of communication with me. "Anaya, did you remember to pick up my prescription?" Skylar asked one evening, not looking up from her phone.
Of course.
"It's on the kitchen counter with your vitamins."
Thanks.
"Oh, and Blake's mom called. She has some dietary restrictions we need to accommodate when they move in. I'll send you a list." The casual assumption that I would continue serving them even while they planned my replacement was breathtaking in its audacity. "I'll take a look at it," I assured her, adding another voice memo to my growing collection. But my documentation wasn't limited to financial and service records. I was also gathering intelligence about their vulnerabilities, their secrets, their carefully maintained facades. I knew about Blake's gambling problem, the one he thought he'd hidden by using cash advances and transferring money between accounts. I'd seen the credit card statements, noticed the unexplained ATM withdrawals, watched him delete betting apps from his phone when Skylar entered the room. I knew about Skylar's affair, the emotional relationship with her former college boyfriend Marcus that had been escalating through social media and text messages. I'd seen her phone notifications, witnessed her secretive behavior, noticed her sudden interest in working late and attending weekend networking events. I knew about their tax problems, the unpaid bills they'd been ignoring, the creditors they'd been avoiding. As their financial contributor, I'd become privy to their complete financial picture, including the parts they tried to hide from each other. Most importantly, I knew about their professional situations in ways they'd forgotten. Skylar had repeatedly vented to me about office politics, sharing details about client relationships, internal conflicts, and confidential business strategies. Blake had complained about job site issues, safety violations, and tensions with supervisors. They'd treated me like a therapist, a confidant, a safe space for their frustrations and secrets. They'd never considered that the invisible woman they were discarding might remember everything they'd shared. By the end of the second week, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that would have impressed any private investigator. Financial records, service documentation, recorded conversations, photographic evidence, and detailed intelligence about every aspect of their lives. Carmen reviewed my materials with obvious satisfaction. "This is incredibly thorough work. You've essentially built airtight cases for tenant rights, financial compensation, and service contract violations. What's our next step?" "I'm going to send them a formal legal notice. Nothing aggressive yet, just a professional letter outlining your legal status and requesting a meeting to discuss terms for your departure." She drafted the letter while I waited, each sentence carefully crafted to sound reasonable while establishing a foundation for future action. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Blake Hendricks, I represent Mrs. Anaya Layla Rodriguez regarding her current residency at address. It has come to my attention that you have requested Mrs. Rodriguez to vacate the premises by date. Please be advised that Mrs. Rodriguez has established legal residency through her 3-year continuous occupancy and substantial financial contributions to the household. Under state tenant protection laws, she is entitled to proper notice and due process before any change in her living situation can be implemented. Mrs. Rodriguez has invested over $150,000 in direct financial support and property improvements during her residency. Additionally, she has provided childcare and household management services valued at approximately $200,000 over the 3-year period. We request a meeting to discuss appropriate compensation for Mrs. Rodriguez's contributions and to establish a mutually agreeable timeline for any changes to her living situation. Please contact our office within 10 business days to schedule this discussion. Failure to respond or attempts to force Mrs. Rodriguez's departure without proper legal process may result in formal legal action to protect her rights and interests. Sincerely, Carmen Delgado, ESQ. When do you want to deliver this? Carmen asked. I thought about the timing. Blake's parents were supposed to arrive in 2 weeks. Skylar had already started preparing their room, moving my belongings to progressively smaller spaces. They were operating under the assumption that I would quietly disappear according to their timeline. Send it tonight, I decided. Let them spend the weekend processing what they've gotten themselves into. Carmen's assistant hand-delivered the letter at 6 p.m. on Friday, just as Blake was arriving home from work. I watched from the kitchen window as he signed for the certified envelope, his face already showing confusion about receiving legal correspondence. I prepared dinner as usual, humming softly while Blake and Skylar huddled in the living room, reading and rereading Carmen's letter. Their voices grew increasingly tense as the implications sank in. She hired a lawyer. Skylar's voice carried clearly to the kitchen. Over this. It says she has tenant rights, Blake replied, sounding stunned. And something about $350,000 in contributions? That's ridiculous. She's been living here rent-free. I smiled as I seasoned the pasta I was preparing. Rent-free. They still didn't understand that I'd been paying rent. I'd just been paying it in labor, love, and direct financial support instead of monthly checks. When I called them for dinner, they sat at the table I'd bought, eating food I'd prepared, struggling to maintain normal conversation while processing the legal bombshell I'd delivered. The meatballs are perfect tonight, Blake said, clearly trying to maintain normalcy. Thank you, I replied graciously. I used that new recipe Skylar suggested, but their performance was strained. They kept glancing at each other, communicating through looks that I pretended not to notice. The letter had accomplished exactly what Carmen intended. It had transformed me from a powerless victim into a legal adversary they couldn't simply dismiss. That night, I lay in bed listening to their muffled argument through the thin walls. They were realizing that evicting me wouldn't be as simple as they'd assumed. They were beginning to understand that their casual cruelty had consequences, but this was just the opening move. I had 26 days left to show them exactly what they were losing, and I intended to make every single day count. The genius of my plan wasn't in dramatic gestures or explosive confrontations. It was in the gradual, systematic withdrawal of services they'd taken for granted until their lives began unraveling in slow motion. I started small, with changes they'd barely notice initially. The coffee stopped being ready when Blake stumbled into the kitchen at 6:30 a.m. Instead of his usual perfectly timed, perfectly temperatured morning caffeine, he found empty pots and cold machines. "No coffee this morning?" he asked, looking confused. "Oh, I thought you might want to make it yourself," I said pleasantly, as if this were a thoughtful gesture rather than the beginning of his new reality. I was reading about how people appreciate things more when they participate in the process. He grumbled but made his own coffee, probably assuming it was a one-time inconvenience that it wasn't. The next day, there was no coffee prepared.
Or the day after that.
By the fourth day, Blake was buying coffee on his way to work, adding $6 daily to expenses they couldn't afford. Skylar's carefully packed lunches disappeared next. For 3 years, I'd prepared nutritious, Instagram-worthy meals that saved her money and time. Now she found empty containers and no prepared options. "I thought you'd enjoy the freedom of choosing your own lunch," I explained when she asked. "Variety is the spice of life." She started buying overpriced salads and sandwiches during her lunch breaks, easily spending $15 daily on food that had previously cost $3 in ingredients I'd prepared. The twins' elaborate morning routines began simplifying dramatically. No more perfectly coordinated outfits laid out the night before. No more specialized breakfast preparations catering to their individual preferences. No more carefully packed snack bags with educational notes tucked inside. "I think the children need to develop more independence," I told Skylar when she noticed. "They're old enough to make some of their own choices." The result was morning chaos as 4-year-olds tried to select weather-appropriate clothing and prepare their own breakfast. What had been smooth, efficient mornings became stressful battles that left everyone frazzled before the day began. But my systematic withdrawal went deeper than daily conveniences. I stopped managing their financial life, the invisible labor that had kept their budget functional, and no more clipping coupons or monitoring sales. No more buying household staples before they ran out. No more coordinating bill payments or tracking due dates. No more researching the best deals on everything from groceries to insurance. The first grocery shop they did themselves cost $200 more than usual because they bought items at regular prices without checking sales or using coupons I'd been accumulating. They ran out of toilet paper, laundry detergent, and other essentials because no one was monitoring inventory levels. Their electric bill increased by $80 because I stopped vigilantly managing energy usage. I had been turning off lights, adjusting thermostats when they left, running appliances during off-peak hours. Without my constant attention, their consumption spiked dramatically. I watched their stress levels rise as their previously smooth household operations began grinding to a halt. They were experiencing what their life actually looked like without my invisible support system. "Everything feels so chaotic lately," Skylar complained to Blake one evening, not realizing I was listening from the kitchen. "I can't figure out what's different, but nothing seems to be working right." "Maybe it's just the stress of the transition," Blake replied. "Things will settle down once we get Mom and Dad moved in." I smiled, knowing their stress was about to increase exponentially. The children's activities became my next target. For 3 years, I'd been their transportation coordinator, ensuring they made it to swimming lessons, play dates, and educational activities. I'd been their homework supervisor, their project assistant, their academic support system. I stopped. "I think you and Blake should handle more of the direct parenting responsibilities," I told Skylar when she asked why I hadn't picked up Zayden from soccer practice. "It's important for children to see their parents actively involved in their activities." The result was scheduling chaos. Missed appointments, forgotten homework, incomplete projects. Blake and Skylar found themselves juggling work responsibilities with constant phone calls about children they'd forgotten to pick up or assignments they'd failed to oversee. Their employer relationships began suffering as they left work early or arrived late due to parenting emergencies they'd never had to handle while I was managing everything. But the most devastating withdrawal was emotional. I stopped being the family problem solver, the conflict mediator, the person who made everyone's life easier through anticipation and preparation. When Zara had a meltdown about wearing socks, I didn't intervene with the patient distraction techniques I'd developed. When Zayden couldn't find his favorite toy, I didn't produce it from the organizational system I'd created. When Blake and Skylar argued about money, I didn't offer the perspective and solutions that had previously diffused their conflicts. I became exactly what they'd always treated me as, a polite houseguest who offered no solutions, took no initiative, and provided no value beyond basic presence. "It's like living with a stranger," I heard Skylar tell her sister during a phone call. "She's still here, but she's completely checked out. She barely talks to the kids, doesn't help with anything, just sits in her room most of the time. The irony was beautiful. I was giving them exactly what they'd asked for, my absence. While still physically occupying the space they wanted me to vacate. 2 weeks into my systematic withdrawal, their household was in complete chaos. They were spending hundreds more monthly on convenience foods, takeout, and services I'd been providing for free. They were exhausted from managing responsibilities they'd forgotten existed. They were fighting constantly about logistics that had previously been invisible. And Blake's parents hadn't even arrived yet. Carmen called me with an update on their response to her letter. "They want to meet," she reported. Blake's lawyer called to set up a negotiation session. They hired a lawyer. A very expensive one. Apparently, they're taking this seriously now. Good, I said, feeling that dark satisfaction spread through my chest. When do we meet? Next Friday. But Anaya, there's something else you should know. Blake's lawyer mentioned they're considering counterclaims. They might try to argue you were never a legitimate tenant, that you were just a houseguest who overstayed her welcome. I laughed, surprising Carmen with my confidence. Let them try. I have 3 years of documentation proving otherwise. Plus, they're about to discover just how valuable this houseguest really was. That evening, Blake attempted what I assumed was supposed to be a peace offering. He knocked on my bedroom door, the bedroom that used to be their home office before I'd furnished it completely, and entered with an awkward smile.
"Hey, Anaya. Can we talk?"
I looked up from the book I was reading, one I'd bought for my own money, like everything else in the room. Of course, Blake. What's on your mind? He sat on the edge of my bed, running his hands through his hair, in a gesture I recognized as stress. This whole situation has gotten really complicated. The lawyers, the legal stuff. Maybe we can work something out between family?
Family.
Now I was family again. What did you have in mind? I asked innocently. Well, what if we extended your timeline? Maybe gave you 2 months instead of 1 to find a place? And we could help with moving expenses or something. I set my book down and gave him my full attention. That's very generous of you, Blake. But I'm curious, what changed your mind about the timeline? He shifted uncomfortably. It's just things have been really stressful lately. The kids are acting out, Skylar's overwhelmed with work, and honestly, we could use your help managing the transition with my parents moving in. There it was. The admission I'd been waiting for. They needed me, but only on their terms, only until it was convenient to discard me again. I see, I said thoughtfully. So, you'd like me to help you transition to life without me, while also preparing your home for the people who are replacing me? Blake's face reddened. It's not like that. My parents aren't replacing you. They just need care, and we need the space. Of course, I agreed pleasantly. I understand completely. You need me to make your life easier right up until the moment you no longer want me around. Anaya, come on. You're making this sound more dramatic than it is. I leaned forward, my voice remaining calm and sweet. Blake, honey, let me ask you something. If someone told you that you had 1 month to find a new job, a new place to live, and a new purpose for your life, but they wanted you to spend that month training your replacement and organizing their transition, how would you feel? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Take your time thinking about it, I continued. Because that's exactly what you and Skylar asked me to do. And what you're asking me again now. Blake left my room without another word, and I heard him arguing with Skylar in hushed tones until well past midnight. The next morning brought new chaos. Their washing machine had apparently broken during the night, or rather, I'd simply stopped maintaining it. For 3 years, I'd been cleaning the lint trap after every load, checking for clogs, running cleaning cycles with vinegar, and handling minor repairs. Without my constant attention, 3 years of accumulated neglect had finally caused a mechanical failure. The repair guy can't come until Thursday, Skylar announced to Blake over breakfast. And he said it might be a $400 fix. Can't we just take everything to the laundromat? Blake asked. Do you know how much that costs for a family of 4? Plus the time investment. I sipped my coffee silently, remembering the countless hours I'd spent ensuring their laundry was always clean, folded, and organized. They were about to discover that laundry for 4 people, including 2 small children, was a full-time job without proper equipment and systems. That afternoon, Skylar approached me with barely concealed desperation. Anaya, I know things have been tense lately, but could you help me with something? The twins' teacher wants to meet about Zayden's behavior issues, and I'm drowning with work deadlines. What kind of behavior issues? I asked, though I suspected I knew. He's been having meltdowns at school, not following directions, getting aggressive with other kids. It started about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Exactly when I'd stopped providing the emotional stability and patient guidance that had helped him navigate his big feelings. That's concerning, I said sympathetically. Have you considered that he might be reacting to changes in his routine or environment? Skylar's eyes widened slightly as the implication hit her. You think this is because of the moving situation? Children are very sensitive to family stress, I replied diplomatically. Major changes in their support system can be quite disruptive. I watched her process this information, seeing the moment she realized that my emotional withdrawal had directly impacted her children's well-being. But instead of offering to help, I simply said, I'm sure you and Blake will figure out the best way to support him through this transition. Blake's parents, Donna and Harvey Hendricks, arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like the opening act of a disaster movie. I watched from my bedroom window as they unloaded an SUV packed with medical equipment, special dietary supplies, and enough luggage for a permanent relocation. Donna was a thin woman in her late 60s with the pinched expression of someone who viewed life as a series of personal inconveniences. Harvey was broader, using a walker and moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing chronic pain. What struck me immediately was how Blake and Skylar transformed in their presence. The confident adults who'd felt entitled to evict me became nervous, eager to please children desperate for approval. Mom, let me help you with that, Blake said, rushing to assist Donna with a bag that looked perfectly manageable. I can handle it, she replied curtly. Where's my room? I need to rest after that terrible drive. They showed her to what had been the twins' playroom, hastily converted with furniture I'd helped select and arrange. Zayden and Zara's toys had been boxed and moved to the garage, their dedicated space sacrificed for grandparents who immediately began criticizing everything about their accommodations. This mattress is too soft for my back, Donna announced within 5 minutes. And why is the room so cold? I can't sleep in temperatures below 72 degrees. The window faces east, so it gets great morning light, Skylar offered hopefully. I don't want morning light. I need blackout curtains and a white noise machine. The children are too loud in the mornings. Harvey settled into the living room recliner, my recliner, the one I'd bought for comfortable evening reading, and immediately began complaining about the television volume, the coffee temperature, and the lack of proper back support. Blake, he called, this chair needs a different cushion. My physical therapist said I need firm lumbar support. Within hours, their household had gained 2 additional people with extensive needs and expectations, while simultaneously losing the person who'd been managing all the existing needs and expectations. The result was predictable chaos. Donna required specialized meals for her diabetes, prepared at specific times with precise nutritional calculations. Harvey needed help with mobility, medication schedules, and physical therapy exercises. Both demanded constant attention and accommodation for various health issues and personal preferences. Meanwhile, the twins were acting out more dramatically, their routine disrupted by strangers occupying their space and demanding quiet during hours they were accustomed to playing freely. Skylar looked haggard within 3 days, trying to manage her parents-in-law's needs while maintaining her work responsibilities and dealing with increasingly difficult children. Blake worked longer hours, using job demands as an excuse to avoid the household chaos, and I watched it all with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a fascinating social experiment. The breaking point came on Friday morning when multiple crises converged simultaneously. Zara had a complete meltdown about wearing shoes, screaming and throwing herself on the floor, while Donna complained loudly about the noise disturbing her morning routine. Zayden spilled orange juice on Harvey's newspaper, prompting a lecture about children needing better supervision and discipline. The coffee maker chose that moment to break completely, another appliance I'd been maintaining that failed without my attention. The garbage disposal backed up, filling the kitchen sink with foul-smelling water. And the dog Luna, stressed by the household chaos, had an accident on the living room carpet. Skylar stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by crying children, complaining in-laws, and multiple household disasters, looking like she was about to have a nervous breakdown. "I can't do this," she whispered to Blake, who'd reluctantly emerged from his bedroom to assess the situation. "This is insane. Everything is falling apart at once." Blake surveyed the chaos with the expression of someone who'd finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. "Maybe we should call a repair service for the appliances," he suggested weakly. "With what money?" Skylar snapped. "Do you have any idea how much we've been spending since your mother decided she didn't want to help anymore?" They both looked at me, standing calmly in the doorway with my coffee mug, watching their family implode with obvious detachment. "Anaya," Blake said desperately, "could you maybe help us figure out what's wrong with the garbage disposal? You usually know how to fix these things." I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. "I think it's important for you to develop your own problem-solving skills," I replied pleasantly. "You'll need them after I move out." The reminder of my impending departure hit them like a physical blow. They'd been so focused on managing the immediate chaos that they'd apparently forgotten I wouldn't be there to solve future problems. That afternoon, while Skylar dealt with a plumbing emergency and Blake managed his parents' latest complaints, I received a phone call that made me smile. "Mrs. Rodriguez," an unfamiliar voice said. "This is Janet Morrison from Skylar's office. I'm calling because Skylar missed our client presentation this morning, and we can't reach her." "Is everything all right?" Skylar had missed a work presentation. The same Skylar who'd been complaining about her colleague Janet undermining her professionally. The irony was delicious. "She's dealing with some family emergencies," I explained helpfully. "I'm sure she'll contact you as soon as she can. Could you ask her to call me immediately? This was a very important client, and they're not happy about the missed meeting." I promised to pass along the message, knowing that Skylar was currently arguing with a plumber about water damage while simultaneously trying to prepare special meals for Donna's dietary restrictions. When I delivered the message, Skylar's face went white. "The Meridian presentation was today," she gasped. "Oh my God, I completely forgot. That's our biggest potential client this quarter." She immediately called Janet, but I could hear the conversation wasn't going well. Missed client meetings, especially with major prospects, were career-limiting events in Skylar's competitive marketing firm. "I need to go into the office," she told Blake frantically. "Can you handle things here?" Blake looked around at his complaining parents, his misbehaving children, his broken appliances, and his overflowing sink. I guess I'll have to." Skylar left for work, and I watched Blake attempt to manage a household he'd never learned to run. Donna criticized his meal preparation. Harvey demanded help with exercises that Blake didn't understand. The twins sensed the adult's stress and became increasingly difficult. By evening, Blake looked like he'd been through a war zone. "How did you make this look so easy?" he asked me, genuinely bewildered. "Everything I try to do takes 3 times longer than it should, and something always goes wrong." Practice, I replied simply. 3 years of practice, learning everyone's needs, developing systems, building routines that worked for the whole family. Could you maybe show me some of those systems? Just so I can help Skylar manage better? I smiled sweetly. Blake, honey, you fired me, remember? Why would I train my replacement for free? The mediation session took place in Carmen's conference room on a gray Monday morning that matched the grim expressions on Blake and Skylar's faces. They arrived with their attorney, James Morrison, an expensive lawyer whose hourly rate probably exceeded their monthly grocery budget. I studied them as we settled around the polished table. Skylar looked exhausted, her usual careful grooming replaced by hastily applied makeup and wrinkled clothing. Blake kept checking his phone, probably fielding messages about household crises he'd left behind. Their lawyer opened with what I assumed was supposed to be an intimidating strategy. My clients dispute Mrs. Rodriguez's claims of tenant status, Morrison began. She was a house guest who overstayed her welcome, not a legal resident with established rights. Carmen smiled pleasantly and slid a thick folder across the table. Perhaps your clients forgot to mention the $156,000 Mrs. Rodriguez contributed to their household over 3 years? Or the extensive documentation proving her established residency. Morrison's confidence faltered as he reviewed the evidence. Bank records, receipts, photographs, utility bills with my name, voter registration showing their address as my legal residence. The paper trail was overwhelming and undeniable. Additionally, Carmen continued, Mrs. Rodriguez provided childcare and household management services valued at approximately $200,000 market rate over the 3-year period. The economic relationship clearly establishes tenant status and potential compensation claims. Blake shifted uncomfortably. She's family. She wanted to help. Help that you now want to terminate with 1 month's notice, Carmen replied smoothly. Without compensation, without consideration for her contributions, and without proper legal process. She opened another folder. We also have recordings of conversations where your wife explicitly discussed Mrs. Rodriguez's financial support and essential role in your household operations. Skylar's face went pale. She'd apparently forgotten about her habit of venting to me about money troubles, never considering that her words might become evidence. Morrison attempted to regain control. Our position is that any financial contributions were gifts between family members, not rent or investment requiring compensation. Interesting theory, Carmen said. Let's discuss the legal implications of that position. She produced yet another document. If Mrs. Rodriguez's contributions were gifts, then the recipients received substantial financial benefits that may have tax implications. $156,000 in gifts over 3 years could trigger IRS interest, particularly since no gift taxes were paid on amounts exceeding annual limits. Blake and Skylar exchanged panicked glances. They'd obviously never considered the tax implications of accepting my financial support. Furthermore, Carmen continued, if we're treating her services as gifts rather than compensation, then the recipients accepted over $200,000 in free labor without reporting it as income. That's another potential tax issue. Morrison was frantically taking notes, clearly unprepared for the financial complexity Carmen was revealing. However, Carmen said, her tone becoming more accommodating, Mrs. Rodriguez is willing to resolve this matter amicably. She slid a settlement proposal across the table. Our terms are straightforward. Mrs. Rodriguez will vacate the premises within 60 days, providing adequate time to secure appropriate housing. In exchange, she retains ownership of all household items she purchased, and your clients provide $50,000 compensation for services rendered and premature termination of her residency. The number hit them like a physical blow. Blake actually gasped. $50,000, he stammered. We don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps you should have considered the financial implications before evicting the person who is subsidizing your lifestyle, Carmen replied calmly. Morrison requested a recess to consult with his clients. I watched them huddle in the hallway, their conversation growing increasingly heated as they realized the magnitude of their situation. When they returned, Morrison's demeanor had shifted to pure desperation. My clients are prepared to extend Mrs. Rodriguez's timeline to 90 days and assist with moving expenses up to $5,000, he offered. Carmen didn't even consult me before responding. Unacceptable. Our terms remain firm. 60 days, retention of purchased items, and $50,000 compensation. They can't afford $50,000, Morrison protested. Then they can afford the alternative, Carmen replied smoothly. Extended legal proceedings, potential tax investigations, and Mrs. Rodriguez remaining in the home while we litigate her tenant rights. That process could take 6 to 18 months and cost significantly more than our settlement terms. Skylar finally spoke, her voice cracking with stress. Anaya, please. We're family. Can't we work something out that doesn't destroy us financially? I looked at this woman who dismissed me as a logistics problem, who'd treated my 3 years of devotion as inconvenient houseguest behavior, who'd planned my replacement while demanding my continued service. Family, I repeated thoughtfully. Skylar, when you told me Blake's parents were moving in and I needed to leave, did you consider our family relationship then? We just needed the space. When you discussed my departure while I was planning your meals, managing your children, and maintaining your household, did family loyalty factor into your decision? She couldn't meet my eyes. When you and Blake talked about me living rent-free while I was contributing thousands of dollars monthly to your expenses, was that a family conversation? Blake tried to interrupt. Anaya, we didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said. I cut him off. You meant that my contributions were invisible, my service was worthless, and my presence was disposable. You treated me like hired help you could fire at will. I leaned forward, my voice remaining calm despite the fury burning in my chest. Now you want family consideration because the consequences of your choices are financially inconvenient. You want mercy because the cost of replacing me is higher than you expected. Carmen placed a gentle hand on my arm, recognizing the emotion building in my voice. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to accept our settlement terms because they're fair compensation for 3 years of my life that you discarded like garbage. You're going to learn what your household actually costs to maintain without my subsidies. And you're going to discover whether Blake's parents are as generous with their time and money as you expected me to be with mine. The room fell silent except for the sound of Skylar quietly crying. Morrison requested another recess, but this time when they returned, the fight had gone out of them. We accept the settlement terms, he said reluctantly. Carmen began drafting the agreement while I felt something that had been tightly wounded in my chest finally release. This wasn't just about money or legal victory. This was about recognition, respect, and consequences for people who'd confused my generosity with weakness. As we signed the papers, Skylar made one last attempt at salvaging something from our relationship. Will you still want to see the twins sometimes? After you move out? I looked at her with genuine sadness. Skylar, you just spent months planning my removal from their lives. You prioritized Blake's parents' comfort over my relationship with my grandchildren. You can't eliminate me as a family member and then expect me to remain available for visitation privileges. But they love you. They love the grandmother who read them stories, made them special meals, and provided emotional stability. You've decided that grandmother isn't welcome in your home anymore. The person you'll be dealing with now is Anaya Rodriguez, the woman who owns half your household goods and expects appropriate compensation for her services. I gathered my purse and stood to leave. I'll be out in 60 days, with everything I purchased. I suggest you start planning how you're going to replace not just my financial contributions, but my labor, my expertise, and my emotional investment in your family. As I reached the door, I turned back one final time. Oh, and you might want to start shopping for new appliances. Most of the ones currently keeping your household functional were purchased and maintained by me. I suspect you're going to discover they don't work quite as well without proper care. I left them sitting at that conference table, facing the ruins of their carefully planned family restructuring, finally understanding the true cost of their callousness. The next 30 days were a masterclass in strategic dismantling. I had legally secured my right to remove everything I'd purchased, but I approached the process with surgical precision rather than emotional vengeance. I started with the kitchen, photographing every item before carefully packing it away. The stand mixer that had produced countless birthday cakes. The food processor that had made meal prep efficient. The complete set of quality cookware that had enabled nutritious, home-cooked meals. Skylar watched in growing horror as her functional kitchen transformed into a barren space equipped with only the mismatched, low-quality items they'd owned before my involvement. "You're taking the blender too?" she asked, watching me wrap the high-powered appliance that had made the twins' daily smoothies possible. "I purchased it," I replied matter-of-factly, checking the item off my inventory list. Along with the juicer, the rice cooker, and the espresso machine. Their morning routines became exercises in improvisation as familiar conveniences disappeared. Blake discovered that making coffee without an espresso machine required different skills and produced inferior results. Skylar learned that meal preparation without quality tools took significantly longer and yielded frustrating outcomes. But the kitchen was just the beginning. I methodically removed every improvement I'd made to their home. The organizational systems in the twins' closets. The storage solutions in the garage. The cleaning supplies and equipment that had maintained their household's appearance. The living room transformation was particularly dramatic. Without my furniture and accessories, their space reverted to the sparse, college apartment aesthetic they'd maintained before my arrival. The comfortable sectional disappeared, leaving them with a cramped love seat and mismatched chairs. The entertainment center, the decorative elements, the lamps that had created ambience, all gone. "The room looks so empty," Donna complained to Blake, surveying the diminished space. "Where did all the nice furniture go?" "Anaya took it," Blake replied tersely. "Apparently, she bought most of it." "You let a house guest buy your furniture?" Harvey asked, incredulous. What kind of arrangement was this? Blake couldn't answer because he was finally understanding that I hadn't been a house guest. I'd been the primary investor in their lifestyle improvements. But the most devastating removals were the ones that affected daily functionality rather than mere comfort. The washer and dryer disappeared on a Tuesday morning, leaving them with laundry facilities that consisted of a cramped stackable unit in the basement that barely handled normal loads and frequently broke down. The deep freezer that had allowed bulk grocery shopping and meal preparation vanished, forcing them into expensive daily shopping trips for fresh food. The air purification system that had managed Zara's allergies was packed away, leaving them to deal with her breathing problems through expensive medications and frequent doctor visits. Each removal created a cascade of problems they hadn't anticipated. Without the food processor, meal prep became laborious and time-consuming. Without the organizational systems, finding anything required extensive searching. Without the quality appliances, basic household tasks became frustrating ordeals that consumed far more time and energy than they'd remembered. Skylar's work performance continued deteriorating as she struggled to manage increasingly complex household logistics. She missed another important meeting because she had to leave early to pick up Zayden from school, a task I'd handled seamlessly for 3 years. "I don't understand how Anaya made this look so easy," she confessed to Blake one evening, surrounded by dirty dishes, unfolded laundry, and homework assignments she'd forgotten to review. "Maybe because she actually cared about making our lives better," Blake replied with uncharacteristic insight, "while we just expected her to handle everything without recognizing what she was doing." But recognition was coming too late to matter. Blake's parents were discovering that their new living situation wasn't the comfortable arrangement they'd expected. Without my management, the household was chaotic, stressful, and poorly organized. Donna's dietary needs weren't being met consistently. Harvey's physical therapy equipment wasn't properly maintained. Both were beginning to question whether this living arrangement was sustainable. Maybe we should look into assisted living facilities, Donna suggested during a particularly difficult week when Skylar had forgotten to shop for diabetic-friendly foods and Blake had failed to help Harvey with his prescribed exercises. We can't afford assisted living, Blake admitted. We were counting on family support to make this work. The family support they'd been counting on was packing the last of her possessions and preparing to leave them with exactly what they'd built without her, which turned out to be remarkably little. MY's final week in their house was marked by a series of small disasters that illustrated their complete dependence on systems I'd created and maintained. The garbage disposal broke completely, flooding their kitchen with foul water because no one else had known about the regular maintenance it required. The garden I'd planted and tended died within days because they didn't understand the watering schedule, soil requirements, or pest management I'd been handling. Their grocery expenses skyrocketed as they discovered that feeding a family of 6 without bulk shopping, meal planning, and coupon coordination cost nearly double what they'd been spending. The twins' behavior problems escalated dramatically without my patient, consistent guidance, leading to calls from their school about aggressive incidents and academic decline. But the most telling moment came when 4-year-old Zara climbed into my lap during my last week and asked the question that broke my heart while simultaneously validating my choices. "Grandma Anaya, why don't Mommy and Daddy want you to live with us anymore?" I held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo I'd researched and purchased because it was gentle on sensitive skin. "Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense to children," I told her carefully. "But I want you to know that leaving isn't what I wanted. Will you still be my grandma when you live somewhere else?" The innocence of her question highlighted the cruelty of what Blake and Skylar had done. They hadn't just evicted me. They'd eliminated a primary attachment figure from their children's lives for logistical convenience. "I'll always be your grandma," I promised. "But things are going to be different now." That night, I heard Skylar crying in her bedroom, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd lost. Not just a household manager, but someone who'd loved her children as fiercely as their own mother. But understanding was coming too late to change anything. Moving day arrived with the efficiency of a military operation. I'd hired professional movers who packed my belongings with systematic precision while Blake and Skylar watched their home transform into a hollow shell of its former functionality. MY's new apartment was a revelation, a space that belonged entirely to me, decorated with items I'd chosen, organized according to my preferences, maintained on my schedule. For the first time in 3 years, I could set the thermostat at any temperature I wanted. I could cook meals that appealed to my tastes. I could watch television at volumes that suited my hearing. The freedom was intoxicating, but the real satisfaction came from watching the aftermath of my departure unfold through carefully maintained intelligence networks. Carmen's paralegal, who happened to live in Blake and Skylar's neighborhood, provided regular updates on their deteriorating situation. Within 2 weeks, their lawn had died from neglect, creating brown patches that lowered their property value and attracted complaints from the homeowners association. Their grocery expenses had tripled as they struggled to manage shopping without my systems, buying expensive prepared foods and eating out frequently because no one had time for meal planning and preparation. Skylar's job performance continued declining as household chaos consumed more of her time and emotional energy. She'd been passed over for a promotion she'd been expecting, with her supervisor citing recent reliability issues and decreased focus on client relationships. Blake's parents had indeed begun exploring assisted living options after discovering that their son's household was far too disorganized and stressful for elderly residents with health challenges. But the most delicious irony was watching them attempt to replace my contributions through hired services. They'd hired a cleaning lady who charged $200 weekly for basic maintenance that didn't include laundry, organization, or the detailed attention I'd provided. They'd enrolled the twins in extended daycare programs that cost $800 monthly and didn't offer the personalized attention, homework help, and emotional support I'd given freely. They'd hired a meal delivery service that cost $400 weekly and provided pre-prepared foods that lacked the nutrition and customization I'd offered through home cooking. Between replacement services, increased grocery costs, higher utility bills, and appliance repairs they couldn't manage themselves, they were spending over $2,000 monthly more than when I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle. The $50,000 settlement they'd paid me was being consumed by replacement costs at an alarming rate. And they were discovering that money couldn't buy the kind of comprehensive support I'd provided through love and commitment. But my revenge extended beyond mere financial consequences. 3 months after my departure, I began implementing the final phase of my strategy, the systematic destruction of their professional reputations and social standing. I called Skylar's office with helpful information about her personal situation. "I'm concerned about Skylar Hendricks," I told her supervisor, Janet Morrison, the same Janet who'd been undermining Skylar's presentations. "She's been under tremendous stress with family issues, and I'm worried it might be affecting her judgment and reliability." I provided specific examples of missed deadlines, forgotten commitments, and professional lapses that Janet could easily verify through company records. "I thought someone should know," I concluded, "because Skylar is normally so capable, but these personal problems seem to be overwhelming her professional responsibilities." For Blake, I contacted his construction company's safety compliance office with observations about his recent behavior and stress levels. "I'm calling because I'm genuinely concerned about Blake Hendricks' ability to maintain safety standards given his current personal situation," I explained to the compliance coordinator. "He's been dealing with significant family stress, and I've observed decreased attention to detail and increased irritability that could pose risks on job sites." I provided specific dates and incidents I'd witnessed, framing my concerns as worry for his well-being rather than malicious reporting. Both calls were made anonymously, using information they'd shared with me during 3 years of treating me as their personal therapist and confidant. The results exceeded my expectations. Skylar was placed on a performance improvement plan that essentially ended her advancement opportunities and placed her job security in jeopardy. Blake was assigned to lower responsibility projects and required to attend stress management counseling before being considered for supervisory positions. Their professional setbacks created additional financial pressure just as their household expenses were spiraling out of control. But the ultimate satisfaction came from an unexpected source. Their own children. 6 months after my departure, I received a phone call that filled my heart with vindication. "Grandma Anaya?" Zara's small voice came through my phone, speaking from Skylar's device. "Mommy said I could call you." "Hello, sweetheart. How are you?" "I miss you," she said simply. "Mommy cries a lot now, and Daddy is always angry. Nothing works right since you left." Through careful questioning, I learned that the twins were struggling academically and behaviorally without my support. Their home environment had become chaotic and stressful. Blake and Skylar were fighting constantly about money and responsibilities. Most tellingly, Donna and Harvey had moved to an assisted living facility after concluding that Blake's household was too dysfunctional for elderly residents. "Mommy says we can't afford things anymore," Zara continued. "And she says it's because you took all our stuff."
What do you think about that?
I asked gently. "I think they made you sad, so you left," she replied with 4-year-old clarity. "Like when I'm mean to my friends and they don't want to play with me anymore." The child understood what the adults had refused to acknowledge. Actions have consequences, and treating people badly eventually costs you their presence in your life. A year after my eviction, I received a final validation of my strategy. Skylar called me, her voice broken and desperate. Anaya, I know you have every right to hate us, but I need to ask you something. What is it, Skylar? Would you consider coming back? We'll pay you properly this time. We'll give you whatever space you need, whatever arrangement you want. We can't do this without you. I let her words hang in the silence for a long moment, savoring the complete reversal of our positions. Skylar, I said finally, a year ago, you told me that Blake's parents needed family support and that you needed my space for people who mattered more than I did. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You told me I was living rent-free and not contributing anything meaningful to your family. I didn't understand what you were doing. I'm sorry. You planned my replacement and expected me to facilitate my own removal from my grandchildren's lives. Please, Anaya. We're drowning here. The kids ask about you constantly. Blake's parents moved out because we couldn't handle everything. I'm about to lose my job, and we're behind on the mortgage. I see. I replied, letting her desperation fill the silence. Will you help us? I smiled, sitting in my perfectly organized apartment, surrounded by the possessions I'd reclaimed and the peace I'd rebuilt. Skylar, you fired me, remember? You eliminated my position and gave my responsibilities to people you felt were more deserving of family support. Why would I want that job back? Because we're family, she whispered. Family, I repeated thoughtfully. You know, a year ago, I thought we were family too. I invested 3 years of my life and over $150,000 of my resources in that belief. But you taught me that family is just a word people use when they want something from you. Anaya, please, I learned so much from you, Skylar. I learned that generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. I learned that love without respect becomes servitude. I learned that some people will take everything you offer and still find reasons to discard you when someone better comes along. I paused, letting her absorb the weight of her own lessons being reflected back to her. Most importantly, I learned that I don't need to accept mistreatment from anyone, regardless of their relationship to me. I don't need to make myself smaller to fit into spaces where I'm not valued. I don't need to prove my worth to people who've already decided I'm disposable. So you won't help us? I can't help you, Skylar. Not because I'm not capable, but because you destroyed the foundation that would make my help possible. You eliminated trust, respect, and appreciation from our relationship. You can't rebuild a house after you've burned down the foundation. I hung up the phone and looked around my apartment, my space, my rules, my peace. And that brings us to the end of today's incredible journey from her journey. If Anaya's story of transformation from doormat to warrior inspired you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power. Ring that notification bell because we have more stories of women who refuse to stay silent coming your way. Asterisk, what would you have done in Anaya's situation? Would you have left quietly or fought back like she did? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember that your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth.